Hey there, and welcome to Chapter 6 of the Big Girl School Book Club. And as I record this, we are in the middle of starting to quarantine in our homes for the coronavirus. So I hope you're all safe out there. But what better time to learn something new? If you haven't joined us for the book club yet, it is Picture Perfect Practice by Roberto Valenzuela. I have a link in my Instagram bio to the Kindle version, so you don't even have to go to the store to get the book. You can download it straight to your phone and you can always have it. So this week we're talking about depth. And depth is something that always confused me. I don't know why, because quite honestly, it's pretty simple. I'd hear depth and I'd think, ooh, that's something very fancy and advanced. And in reality, it's really not. A picture is a 2D thing, right? So depth adds dimension and it gives more of a 3D quality to a flat image. And so really depth is just the distance in front of your subject and the distance behind your subject. And the opposite of that is no distance. So when you hear the word flat lay, that's exactly why it's called that, because it's flat. There's no depth. If you take a picture like we did last week in front of murals, that is flat. There's nothing in front of your subject and there's nothing behind your subject. And sometimes flat images can be really cool. But many times depth is really what brings your story to life. And so he talks a lot about when do you use the depth in your photo by including a lot of the surrounding information to tell a story. And when do you blur it out to create a mood? So there's different ways that you can use depth depending on what you're trying to do. And the best way that I can think to explain this, I was actually looking through some old photos this week. Unfortunately, we're putting together a slideshow memorial, and I was going through some old photos that we had in boxes in the basement, and I realized that we don't know a lot about a lot of these photos. So we don't necessarily know who's in them. We don't know when they were taken, where they were taken, what they were doing. But a lot of the photos contain some of this information. So they're not blurry in the background. You can see that there's a baby stroller or a carriage in the background, or you can see a home and you can say, you know what, I remember that was in Cleveland. You can see cars, so you can say, oh, I bet that was in 1934 based on the car. It also gives you some idea on maybe how much money the person had, depending on what kind of car they had. Or you might see baptismal gowns, which would give them clues as to what religion they were. So all of these things, when included in focus in your photograph, helps tell a story. So there's times that you want to use the depth in your photo and keep it all in focus. That's going to tell the greater story. And he uses an example of a Persian wedding, that all the details in that photo really help tell the story. And then there's times that you want to use depth for mood. And that's when you can use different types of light, different types of how does he call it? He used the example of a nature photo. Everything in that photo went together. Everything in the foreground, the background kind of told one cohesive story. And then he showed how directional light can really give dimension to a face and make it look more 3D. So for instance, if you look at me right now, I'm using very flat light because quite honestly, it makes you look younger, right? It fills in all the shadows on your face. It fills in under your eyes. It's a flattering light, but it's very flat, okay? So if I were to get a little bit more directional light where I'd have more shadows on my cheekbones, under my chin, that's going to give me my face. It's going to sculpt my face more and give it more shape and dimension. So that's another example of using light to create depth. I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you some examples from my library like I do every week. Not saying they're perfect examples, but I think they'll do well to explain what he's trying to get you to do. And then his assignment is he's got 2 assignments this week. The first assignment is to take 3 photos where the background tells you something about the story. Okay, so you're going to include the background, even if it's a little busy, and you're going to be able to look at that and tell what's going on in that photo. So think of those old time photos where what clues would you use to figure out what's going on when you don't know anything about the subject? Okay, so think of your photo, someone's looking at it in the future and they're trying to figure out what the story was. And then his other assignment is to use depth with movement. And he shows how you can use motion blur to kind of create depth and make the photo feel like it's moving, like it's not flat, that it's dynamic. And so that's his other assignment. And I'm going to show you some examples from my work as well. So let's go ahead and cut over to that, and we'll start talking about the examples. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. I have pulled some examples from my my own Lightroom. And first, let's look at some flat photos. Okay, remember I said that depth really confused me, and it shouldn't. It's pretty straightforward. So here's a flat lay that I did for this book club. So you can see here's chapter 6 depth, but there's nothing in front of the photos or behind it. It's sitting on a flat table, and therefore it is a flat lay. It lacks depth. Here is a photo we took against a mural, and again, this is flat. There's no dimension because we're against a wall. You can see a little bit, maybe the directional light is giving a little depth to her face through the use of shadows, but overall, it's a pretty flat photo. Here's another flat lay that I did for a customer of mine or a client of mine, and just another flat lay. So I think you get the idea of what lack of depth is. Very straightforward. Now let's talk about depth that tells a story. So here, I'm going to turn on my information here, and you can see that I shot at f8. Now one thing I don't want you to be confused about is depth in your photo versus depth of field, which is controlled by your aperture. So a quick overview, depth of field is how much is in focus in front of your subject and how much is in focus behind your subject. So the higher the F number, so 8 is pretty high, the more in focus from front to back it's going to be. So when I look at this photo, you can see the mountain back here in Rio is in focus, the palm tree in the front is in focus, and all the boats in the middle are in focus. So it has a large depth of field. And the depth in this photo is really telling a story. It's telling me that I'm in a tropical place, that it's a sunny day, that I'm at a boat. I was at a yacht club, and so you can see all the boats. You can see the entire story. And it'd be very different had I used a shallow depth of field and maybe only focused on the palm tree and blurred a lot of this out. It wouldn't be as clear what the story of this photo was. Again, here, this is the Las Vegas Strip. I'm at f8. So everything is in focus from this part of the strip all the way as far down as I could see on the strip. So it's telling me the story of where I am, and I can see every hotel perfectly. I can see all the names, and so I can tell everything I need to about this particular photo based on the depth and the in focus, the large depth of field. Here's another photo. We were cruising around the Red Rock Canyon out in Vegas, and you can see that she is in focus. And if I zoom in, you can also see that the mountains are in focus. So I could have just blurred her out and made her stand out, but instead I chose to use f8 again, where I'm bringing sort of the scenery into focus so you can tell not only that we're driving around in this fun car, but where we're driving around and what the day was like. Here I'm on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I could have once again used a shallow depth of field and kind of blurred out Lower Manhattan in the back, but I chose to use f13, which is a very large depth of field, to show the entire story, to show the bridge, to show where I was in Manhattan, and to kind of tell the overall story. Now here again, I'm at f8, and the canyon's a little bit blurry, but you can see I'm at the Grand Canyon. I've got Cameron, my subject, in focus. You can see she's taking a selfie. She was not close to the edge, I promise. But you can see where we are, and we've used the depth in the picture to tell that story. Now here, I'm using some layering. So another way that you can use depth is by focusing. I could have either focused on Highclere Castle, or I could have focused on the flowers. But here I'm kind of using layers to show that I'm out in the field and in the distance is Highclere Castle. And even though it's blurry, the distinctive shape, I'm able to still see where I am and tell some of the story. So this is a creative way that you can use depth. Here's another, I've shot one wedding in my life, and this was it. And here I was kind of using the flowers that I was standing behind. I blurred them out to kind of add some interest and to give it some depth. So you can see I'm focused on the couple. You can see that their beautiful flowers here are all in focus, but the background is out of focus and the foreground is out of focus. So I've got out of focus, focus, out of focus. And it really adds a really nice layer. It gives it a three-dimensional feel. And if I were to take the same photo with my iPhone, because the iPhone has such a large depth of field, everything would be in focus and the entire look and feel of the photo would be different. Again, here is, I'm at f4, so not a really deep depth of field, but I've got the layers of the girls. I've got some information in the background, and then I also have the sun giving some depth to their hairs, adding some shadows and some interest to the picture. And that was one of his examples that he used in the book, is using directional light to create depth in your photo. Here's another one, more layering. So I stood behind some weeds as she walked along the field, and so you can see that I've got her in focus. I've got these weeds out of focus. I've got the background out of focus. I've got some leading lines here as she walks by. So again, it just creates some additional interest and brings the focus on her and makes the photo feel not so flat. Same idea here. I focused in on her face. I was behind a pine tree, so it added a little color, a little layering. I've got the trees in the background. The color all coordinates, but it really brings the focus to her lips and her eyes and makes her pop, and it gives it that three-dimensional feel again. Same idea here. I shot through some trees. You can see that my subjects are on the water. We're at the beach. It still tells the story. You have enough information, but it makes it look a little bit different than just a flat picture that I might take with my iPhone. Here is another example of using light and the background to create depth. So you can see the light, the directional light is coming back here. It's creating backlighting, some shadows in the front. We've got the background kind of lit up. So we've got, you know, the mountains and the light. We've got the middle ground, and then we've got her as our subject. She's lit up. We've got some shadows. And so the light is really creating the depth here. Again, same idea. This is one of my favorite photos, but we've got her, we've got the car, we've got the tree line, and we've got the light, creating all this beautiful light and shadow and making it feel like just a really, really nice photo, especially where the windows are kind of blurred out. It just adds to the overall feel and light in the photo. Now here's an example where directional light coming from the window is really adding a lot of depth to her face. So where I showed you my face is very flat and it's filling in all the shadows, here the light's coming from the window and it's really creating a nice cheekbone, a nice jawline, some really beautiful shadows. It's lighting up her eyes, it's darkening out the background. It's bright on this side, so it's really creating a lot of dimension, and that can be really, really beautiful. And this is similar to an example that he showed in the book as well, using directional light to kind of carve out and create depth in your face. Now here is an example of using motion to create depth. So in this fairly flat scene, I think if we were still, whatever was on the billboards behind Cameron on the train, would have felt more flat, like she was up against a wall. But because we can see that it's moving, you can really, you can tell. Now watch, when we pull this back, here's a similar photo with more to the story. So here you can clearly see she's on a train. We've got kind of a still billboard over here, your typical train billboard. But we have the background rushing by, and you can see the trees and the flowers, and even the light is creating a little bit of depth on her face. So just pulling, if I go here and I compare, you know, it's a same picture, but it's different because we're adding more to the storytelling when we pull back a little bit in the second picture. So I hope that makes sense. Now here, we were out taking pictures on this really cool graffiti wall in Cabbagetown here in Atlanta. And some people started biking and jogging by, and so I just slowed my shutter speed down, and I wanted the, oops, let me just have this. I wanted this background to be in focus, and I knew that I wanted the bikers and the joggers to blur out. And so I slowed my shutter speed down. I took my f-stop way up so that I could get this really in focus, and I just waited for people to go by. And so instead of this looking just like a flat wall here with him up against it, you can tell that he's out front, he's going by. It gives it a little bit more action, a little bit more depth. It looks totally different than if I just snapped an iPhone picture and he was frozen and the wall was frozen. It would look much flatter. Let's see if I have any more examples. So those are pretty much my examples from the examples that he gave us. So I look forward to seeing what you come up with. I hope that makes sense the way that I explained it. Don't make it as complicated as I always did. I thought, ooh, depth, that's such a, big word. It's so difficult, but it's really not. It's really not. It's just, is it flat or does it have something in the foreground and the background that helps tell the story, whether it's with a mood or whether with its environment. So I look forward to seeing your pictures. Tag them, hashtag the Big Girl School on Instagram, or you can join our Facebook community, and we'd love to see what you come up with. And let me know if you have any questions. I love answering questions. Thanks, and stay safe out there.